It's AP season. If your AP exams are coming up and you have no clue where to start studying and you want to know the formula that I use to get 5s on basically every AP test that I took, stick around and I'll go through every single step, my exact procedure that I use to score 5s on basically every single AP exam I took. For context, I took 15 AP classes listed on the screen and I took exams in 11 of them and I got 9 5s and 2 4s. The first major step, take the course at your school, or in other words, don't self-study. Self-studying seems like a potentially good idea if you're very self-motivated and you can really push yourself to follow a strict study schedule. But the biggest reason why I don't advocate for self-studying for any AP exam is because it's not really worth the gain that you're going to get. When you're applying to colleges, a lot of the times they look in your region, first in your school, but then in your region that you're coming from, and if they see that your school doesn't offer a bunch of APs, then self-studying for a bunch of APs, although impressive, it's not really something that they're going to commend you for. I think it's a much better idea to put the effort that you could put into self-studying for some AP exams into pursuing an extracurricular and doing it very well. For example, going to the state or national level in that extracurricular. If you're already a good student academically, then pushing yourself to do even more academics rather than going into other areas and improving other areas of your life for your college application may be the best choice instead of self-studying for any sort of AP exam. The few exams that I would potentially recommend self-studying for are either language exams, if you already speak the language at home or are fluent in some other manner, or some of the less strenuous AP exams, maybe like AP Psych or AP Environmental Science. But again, the task of self-studying, you're going to have to figure out what to learn, your own study schedule and everything around that. Perhaps if you already have knowledge of the content from some other advanced but non-AP class, then it could potentially work, but it's just putting a lot of pressure on yourself, especially around the time that exam season comes and all the AP exams are condensed into 2 weeks in May. But assuming you are not self-studying the course, or even if you are, this is the general path that you should follow to make sure that you ace that AP exam and get the 5 that you have hoped and dreamed for. Firstly is to find out the best review book to get for that class. And I don't have a list of every single review book for every single AP class because it can change from year to year. But what I would do is I would Google best AP review book for AP whatever class. And then I would look on all of the websites and see their rankings. But what I like to do most, especially when it comes to more niche areas, is to look up that same sort of search, but limit it to Reddit. So if you go to Reddit and look up best AP review book for this class or best AP whatever class review book, then a lot of the times people will have their opinions and they'll share them. And you can see how many people agree based on the upvotes or downvotes on that comment. And a lot of the times the top post will have the generally most popular or most effective book. For example, a lot of the times major test companies such as Barron's, Princeton Review, 5 Steps to a 5. There's a bunch of books, but I'm not going to recommend certain books over others, but I think just looking online for the books that you find best, because I did use books from a variety of companies when studying for different exams, is the best thing that you can do to make sure that you have the one best review book. Because I think it's better to focus on one review book than to try to focus on 2 or 3 at a time. Because at that point, you're going to split yourself too thin, especially if you're studying for more than one exam. Also, Reddit posts tend to be more frank than online posts or official rankings on different websites because those could be sponsored, those could have some sort of outside influence that you don't know of. So Reddit posts tend to just be more frank and candid, which is why specifically I look to Reddit for advice on these sort of topics. Now, the next step is to set up a study schedule on a physical calendar. And it's important that it's a physical calendar because when we write something down, it inherently pushes us to follow it more than if we were to simply put it on Google Calendar. Because I love using Google Calendar, I use it for everything, but when I was setting up my AP study schedule, I would go to some website that would print a PDF of the next 2 to 3 months. So if I was starting in February, from February to May, and I would see exactly what the timeline would be. Because even if I put my AP study schedule as a separate calendar on my Google Calendar, it would be so easy to just move the event, to say, okay, I'm going to push this back a bit because I didn't do it today. But if I have a physical calendar, I'm physically seeing my progress go farther and farther behind instead of delaying everything and pushing my study schedule. So I believe that sort of pressure made me stick to my physical AP study calendar more than it would have if I used Google Calendar to plan out all my AP studying. Also, what I tend to do is I tend to just print one physical calendar for all my AP studying because it's easier to follow and see what I have to do for the whole day as opposed to printing 4 versions of the March calendar and 4 versions of the April calendar. because then everything gets split up and it's harder to plan everything and see everything together. So if I study for multiple things, I can see, is this too much reading for today? Is this too much of an assignment for today on top of what I'm already doing? Because trust me, being academic in high school is no easy feat, in addition to studying for AP exams outside of that. Now, when the actual physical calendars are printed for these AP exams, it's important to set a realistic amount of work that can be done for these exams. So what I would stick to is perhaps 20 pages from each book. And when I say 20 pages, I mean that I would read the book front to back, because if I studied so far in advance, starting around February, March, even early April, I would have time to do that. And I think it's most effective in terms of reviewing the entire content for the exam. So 20 pages per day could be reasonable. It also depends on how thick the pages are. So if it's very difficult for one subject to go through those pages, then perhaps you would stick to 10 pages a day. And again, starting to study earlier makes these tasks much more easier to keep up with, especially if there are multiple exams that one is studying for. Also, you can alternate. So if I was studying for 4 exams and I had to read from 4 books, I can do reading from these 2 books on one day and reading from another 2 books on the next day, and go in a sort of A-B pattern. I don't really recommend splitting it up too much, so it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, although you can experiment and see what works for you in that sense. But I think that sticking to refreshing the topic in your mind every other day at least is important when effectively studying for these exams. But before I would go through reading the entire content of each of the books that I got, what I would do is take the diagnostic tests in the front of each book. Usually for each AP review book, they have some sort of diagnostic test, and it's really important to have some sort of practice test, even if they may not be exactly like the AP tests. Having those in your book can really help gauge your knowledge. But what I would do, I would set aside time on the weekend to do these practice tests, because they are 3 hours long, and I would see, how did I do in this area? How did I do in this area? Sometimes the books make the practice exams a little shorter, just so it's easier to complete them. So if that's the case, you can even schedule it on a weekday night. But in general, the diagnostic test is super important to gauge what your understanding of the material is. Also, if you are shorter on time and you started studying a little bit later, maybe March, April, to get ready for these exams, then it would be best to take this practice exam to gauge what topic you do not know as much about, because then you can go to study those sections specifically, or those practice questions specifically, and you'll be studying the stuff that you aren't as strong as when you don't need to study the other stuff that you're already strong in. So that's the general setup of the AP calendar, and that's the general setup of the physical study calendar that you will use to study for an AP exam to get a 5. If you're taking more than one AP class, so say 2 to 4, then a good strategy to make sure that you can still do practice exams for all of these tests is to say, do one practice exam for subject A on Saturday, then do subject B the next day on Sunday, and then next weekend you can do subject C on Saturday and subject D on Sunday, and then alternate. Practice exams are generally used more closer to the exam date, so when I'm first starting to study, I would just use Saturday and Sunday as reading days or practice question days, depending on what AP book I was using. But the practice exams are super important to do, especially when the AP exam dates are coming close, and they're important to do in timed conditions and in testing conditions to make sure that you can fully experience what it's like to take an AP exam. Because if you've never taken one before, then sitting for 3 hours, even with the breaks, can be a grueling process. So setting that up for yourself for any sort of exam is super important to make sure that you do well when you're doing the exam on exam day. Also, do not burn yourself out with these planned study schedules. I think I tended to fall victim to this in terms of putting a lot of pressure on myself to read a ton of pages from all these AP books. You have to schedule something that is realistic for your timeline. If you have any activities outside of school, then it's already important to allot your time wisely. Say that you're going to read 80 pages from different AP review books every single weekday on top of the homework you already have and the extracurriculars you already have. It's going to be an insane amount of work, and it's not going to be possible with a healthy amount of sleep. So it's important to say, I can only read 20 pages a day, but I am fine with that. If I just start earlier, then I'm going to finish it. And again, if you're running short on time, then prioritize what you did worst on the diagnostic test. To stick to your study schedule, you have to have a reason motivating you to do well on these exams. For me, a lot of it was just pressure to get into a good college or pressure to do well academically. And in a sort of a different perspective, for example, compared to the SAT or ACT, you literally just have to get a number from 1 to 5. So you just have to be good enough to fall into the bucket of a 5. You just have to be good enough to get there. And it's really not that difficult if you really put the effort into study and you really put the effort in during the class over the year to actually understand the material. So it is possible to get a 5 on these exams. You just have to put the effort in and do not doubt your skills in whatever subject you may be studying. As a side note, it's also important to do well in the AP classes you're actually taking throughout the year in high school. So when you have an exam for that class, you should be studying for it. Even if the details of that specific unit won't show up on the AP exam, it is important that you're actively gaining as much information throughout the year as possible, because then you're going to know most of it when you're looking in the review book, which makes it a review rather than learning it for the first time, which a lot of people may fall into and think and question to themselves, why am I not doing as well as I could be? The effort has to be put in throughout the whole year to understand the subject well and to do well. And that is the pattern that leads to success on the AP exam, with a healthy review as well. Also, if you want to do well in the AP exam and get a 5 or any sort of high score, you cannot rely on your teacher to do all of the review. There's simply not enough time for the teacher to get you a review that will guarantee you a 5. Teachers may or probably will assign you some sort of review to do before the AP exam, but a lot of the effort needs to be put in on your part, which is why the motivation has to be there personally for you to do well in this exam. So you have to put in the effort, and you cannot expect your teachers to plan a whole study schedule and give you extraordinary amounts of work that is necessary to get a 5 on the AP exam. Now, for questions you got wrong on an AP exam, it's important to understand why you got that question wrong. So in general, exam or practice exam review should not be something that you quickly skim. In fact, when I'm being very thorough or I have the time to, I prioritize looking over every single question and seeing why is this response wrong and why is this response right. Even if it takes a very long time, I'm gaining knowledge about the key stuff that may be tested on the exam. If you're running short on time and you are already very close to the AP exam date, then yes, only review the stuff that you have gotten wrong or that you completely guessed on. But when you look at that stuff, it's important to make a flashcard and study it every single day as to why you got it wrong. A lot of people use Quizlet, but you can also use Anki, which is a timed repetition flashcard. But if that's something that is completely new to you, then using Quizlet is fine to just review the stuff that you messed up on when studying for that AP exam. If it's more of a humanities course, or specifically an English course where you're asked to write different types of essays, then perhaps just practicing the essays is the most effective thing you can do, and asking your teacher for feedback on your essays is something that can help you do well in these exams. But also just trying to do as well as possible throughout the year in those English courses is perhaps the best thing that you can do for yourself. Also, with writing in general, especially grading writing, it's a very difficult process, and a lot of the times AP exams just put the nuance of good writing into a point called sophistication, which is notorious for being very difficult to get. So I wouldn't study, for example, to say get the sophistication point, but I would make sure that you would get all the other points, whether that be for a good thesis or a thesis that's there and clearly defensible, and putting enough evidence that supports that thesis to make sure that you can get the maximum amount of points possible on every single essay that you have for any sort of AP exam. So if you follow this guideline, then you should be super prepared for any AP exam coming your way. Now, it's the day before the exam, and this is my advice as to what to do. One is to make sure you get a good night's rest, and make sure that you in the previous week have been adjusting your sleep pattern to wake up for whenever your AP exam is. Now, if you're in high school and they make you wake up notoriously early, I'm sorry for that situation, but it's something that you must adapt to. So you need to start falling asleep at a time that you will be in bed for 9 hours before the time you wake up for the AP exam. So if your AP exam is at 8 a.m., then you need to probably wake up at 6:30 or 7 a.m. to get to school and eat a good breakfast. So you have to go back 9 hours and make sure you're in bed for those 9 hours to make sure you get at least 8 hours of sleep and are fully rested and prepared for this exam. Because studying and cramming the night before will not only not be good for you, because you should have long-term retention or long-term memory over studying for more than 4 weeks for these exams, but it will also just really drag you down in terms of thinking about answering the questions correctly on the exam and destroying your analytical thinking for any sort of essay or long response question on the exam. This should already be on your calendar, but please make sure you know when your exam dates are and what times there are. You don't want to go into an exam room and miss the exam because it was at 8 a.m. instead of 12 p.m. or 2 p.m. or whenever the exams are administered in your area. Also, be sure to have everything that you're going to need to do well in the exam. A writing device like a pencil, a mechanical pencil, anything that is allowed at the AP exam. If you need a calculator, then you should bring a calculator. If it's allowed for the exam, you should probably have a mechanical watch, because I believe any sort of Apple Watch or electronic watches are prohibited, and you should make sure that you have water, snacks, tissues, and anything along those lines to help you feel comfortable while you're taking the exam. Now, for the actual day of the exam, of course, have a good filling breakfast to make sure that you are not hungry for the 3-hour exam that you're about to take, but also it's important to say something if your testing environment is making you uncomfortable. So for my AP Spanish exam, they would see this in a bunch of desks in a small gym, and my desk was specifically wobbling back and forth. So I made an effort to say, I need another desk, because I was not about to take a 3-hour exam on a wobbly desk that was going to make me distract myself instead of focusing on the material that was presented during the exam. Also, if you need a tissue, just feel free to ask for a tissue. Or if you need to go to the restroom, just go during the breaks for the AP exam. So if you drink a lot of water in the morning, it's important to go to the restroom before you start the exam so you're completely focused on the exam and not worried about when the next break will be. That is all the advice that I have on studying for AP exams. I know that if you follow this and you apply yourself, you will get a 5. So do not take this advice lightly. Motivate yourself, pressure yourself to do well. It is possible, speaking from experience, and I believe in all of you. So thank you for watching. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and comment what you want to see next, and I'll see you in the next video.